Hello my dear students, today we will learn a very exciting feature of Java, that is interface. In Java, we can implement abstraction and multiple inheritance using an interface. To understand this feature, let's start with some basic information that we can able to gather from the real world. Sir Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein are two most famous personalities. Their contribution for science are immense, but what is the most common between them? Well, both of them are person. Therefore, let's first figure out what can be the basic characteristics of a person. Well, a person must have a name, a birth date, and a country. Without these three property or attribute, we can't even imagine a person. Also, a person can able to share or display the information whichever he or she wants to. Though it's vary person to person, like a teacher may wants to share the information about his designation, whereas a student may wants to share his marks. Therefore, we can say that the property is there, but it is not well defined. For the simplicity of the understanding, we will stick to these properties. Now, let's see how to implement all this gathered information to define a person. As of now, we have gathered this information. The name, birthday, and countries is string, and the display method is there, but it's not defined. So how to implement that in Java? Well, the abstract or non-defined method, which is display info, makes the person class as an abstract class. And as far as the instance variable is concerned, it's string, full name, birth date, and country. Now let us look the constructor. Why we have included that parameterized constructor? As we have already stated that we cannot imagine a person without full name, birth date, and country, this parameterized constructor ensure whoever is going to inherit this person class must assign the value to these attributes. Also, it requires to implement the abstract method, which is display info, as per their requirement. Now, let's get back to the previous. What can be the other similarities between Einstein and Newton? Well, they both did some excellent researches in the field of science. So, they have the knowledge of the research methodology and how it looks like. As far as the research is concerned, the field is specifically scientific, and there are certain methods like observation, hypothesis, and conclusion. Though there are other methods too, but for the sake of simplicity, we stick to these three methods or steps. Now, the properties, observation, hypothesis, and conclusion, or the methods are not well defined. Means it varies person to person, but the field scientific is specific. So how to implement that in Java? Well, the class research is abstract because of these abstract properties, which are observation, hypothesis, and conclusion. And as far as the field is concerned, it is static and modified by final. Why final? Because the scientific value or the value scientific is fixed for the attribute field. That ensure whoever going to inherit the class research can enjoy or can get this particular property which is filled, but cannot able to manipulate the property or manipulate the value of the property. Now, as of now, we saw that the Einstein and Newton is a person, also a good researcher, and that makes them a good scientists. So, on the other hand, we can say a scientist is a person who can research, and Einstein or the Newton is basically the object of that kind. Therefore, we can say scientists actually inherit two different concepts, and the concepts are person and research. This is called the multiple inheritance. Now, in Java, we know a class can inherit one class at a time. That is the multi-level inheritance. So, how to achieve the multiple inheritance? Well, the answer is interface. Let's take a look of interface. The basic purpose of the interface is achieving the full abstraction. That means within an interface there is no concrete thing and the multiple inheritance. So let's first do some facts check. All the members of the interface is implicitly public, no matter whether these are the member variables or the method. An interface cannot be instantiated, and if an interface cannot be instantiated, we won't require a constructor. Now, if there is no constructor, then who is going to assign the value, or who is going to initialize the members? Well, we don't require the initialization. So, what we require? So, for the interface, the members should get a static storage with a proper unchangeable value, and that makes the field of interface is static and final. There is no concreteness in interface, therefore you cannot expect an concrete method within the interface. So all the methods within the interface are abstract. An interface can be implemented by a class, but an interface can extend multiple other interfaces. So let's take a look what is the basic difference between an abstract class and the interface. So these are the basic differences between abstract class and interface. Here we use interface as a keyword. Interface can have only static and final method. All the members, that means variables or the methods, are only public. There is only abstract methods within an interface, and there is no requirement for constructor. So how to redesign our research abstract class into an interface? So let's start with interface keyword. The fields are public, static and final, and this field here in our example is assigned as scientific, so we cannot change the value scientific further, and followed by 3 abstract properties or methods. So as you can see, for the interface all the fields are public, the member variables are static and final, so it gets a fixed storage and we can refer using that also, and all the methods are abstract. You cannot expect any concrete property. So within that interface these properties are abstract, these don't require any initialization, therefore we won't require any constructor for the interface. Now as all the methods are public, abstract, and all the fields are public, static and final, we don't need to write the same thing again and again, so we can simply write an interface like this. Now let's focus on scientists. We know scientists inherit research and person at a time. So it's a case of multiple inheritance. So what we can say, scientist should be a person. Yes. Scientists must do scientific research. That's true. But apart from that, scientists can have its own property, that is observe, presume and resolve in our case. So these are the instance variables of scientist. Also in our case, the scientist can also publish his thesis on his research findings. So that's going to be a method. So now how to define the scientist or the class scientist? So let's start with this two. So we have abstract person class and interface research. So how to define the scientist class? So here, please look at this very carefully. The scientist is our class and that is another abstract class. So we have to use the extends keyword here. But as we said, the research is an interface. So we have to use the implements keyword, because an interface can be implemented by a class and class can be extended by a class. Now, these three are the instance variable for scientist class. Now let's talk about the constructor. Why we require the constructor? As we know, this particular person class have a constructor which is a parameterized, and we know whoever going to inherit that person class must initialize this property. We need to call, or we need to initialize the super property, and to initialize that we need to call the super class constructor. So we here use the super keyword to initialize the super class property, and for that we have to include a constructor for scientist class, which is also a parameterized one. Now this is the own method. Thesis is the own method for scientist class, which includes the observation, hypothesis and conclusion. Now remember, these are the methods which are there in the research. So we need to implement that method. So in our case, we have implemented all the abstract method within the interface research. So here, if we call observe, we will say observe. If we call hypothesis, we will say presume. If we call conclusion, we will say resolve. Now look at the keyword this. This is exactly same or same as super, but differs only one sense. Super represents the superclass, but this represents the current or the subclass itself. That means we can think this as an object reference for the subclass or the own class. Now there is another abstract property in the person class which is display info. So we need to initialize that property as well. So here we initialize or implemented the display info, like it will going to say the first name first, then it will going to display the field which is scientific, and then it will call the thesis method, which further say this or which further provide this input. So how it will work? So let us start with the object creation. Suppose we created two objects, which is Einstein and Newton, and we provide these values. So these values will assign these fields. Now we initialize observe, presume and resolve for both the object like this. So they go here. And finally we call this display info, and we get that output. Well, that's all for today. Put your queries in the comments.